In Australia, there is a TV station called the ABC, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and being government funded, it had to fill a quota of programming aimed at kids. And in the 2000s, in an effort to broaden their appeal to a young adult audience, they started commissioning and importing shows with older child demographics. These were often dramas that revolved around teenagehood in one particular environment or another. Blue Water High, Parallax, and possibly the most intriguing one, Jeopardy. Jeopardy was a British production that split filming between Scotland and Australia and was originally produced for CBBC in Britain before being bought in agreement by the ABC. It first aired April 2002 and concluded its run 2 years later in May of 2004. And it's a strange example of a well-written kids show viewed by everyone in its day and then seemingly lost to time. Jeopardy has no cult following, no repeats on the current networks, and no relevance in modern pop culture. Instead, Jeopardy is merely an afterthought in 90s and 2000s kids' minds. But if you ask people who grew up in that time in either the UK or Australia, they'll probably remember it, and will be amazed at themselves for the fact that they do. If your memory hasn't been jogged yet by the vision, you probably never saw it. So for the uninitiated, what is Jeopardy? Well, Jeopardy centres around a Scottish group of high school students who formed a UFO lunchtime club and for reasons unknown to anyone, managed to secure the necessary funding for an overseas trip to hunt for aliens for their lunchtime club.
Extraterrestrial activity in Australia!
And so 8 students and their wildly incompetent teacher, Mr. Simmons, who was actually played by an Australian, set off to Australia to go to the bush and look for aliens with their handycams under the guidance of local Aussie, Melissa. Almost immediately, stuff starts going a bit wrong. Sarah sees bright flashing lights thought to be aliens on night 1, Leon gets bitten by a snake on day 2 and the anti-venom is missing because Chrissy stole it to prove a point, their guide Melissa goes missing attempting to drive to town and their teacher Mr. Simmons falls over a waterfall. Now, if you're already confused, you can't be blamed. The writing in this show, although pretty good, seems like it was developed episode by episode, instead of with an entire series arc in mind. Every episode finishes on a cliffhanger that left kids all over the country wondering what was going to happen next, and getting keen for school to finish the next day so they could tune in and find out.
It's not there!
The basic premise was that every episode something would go wrong and they would have to overcome that obstacle while dealing with the overarching mystery of that season. It won an award in the UK for Outstanding Kids Drama, as the writing is actually very addictive. The Australian setting with the Scottish students allows for an audience from various locations. The only gripes on the show is that the acting is extremely subpar, and the kids never seem to run out of tape despite having their cameras on and recording virtually all the time. Towards the end of the first season, the group actually does get abducted by aliens and wake up in hospital with 2 members missing and having somehow lost a whole day of time. The back 2 seasons involve the group on the run from Helen Stanich, an Australian Special Service agent tasked with ensuring their understanding of their aliens. This is where the show gets particularly interesting. This portion of the show introduces the most famous concept to come out of it, red eye disease, where the kids contract a red eye before splitting into 2 versions of themselves and disappearing into thin air. A spooky concept for kids at the time. And it's a really interesting conceptual show, but for whatever reason, this global production has little or no surrounding intrigue or notes regarding its history, and none of the Scottish actors who played the 8 students went on to do anything after the show, except one small appearance on the British version of Shameless, and a few TV cameos for James Pearson, who played Simon. Otherwise, there's a few of the actors who literally did nothing else in their entire career. No shorts, no single TV episodes, nothing. Another peculiar element to the production was the tendency for the crew to shoot alternate versions of events, and then play the one that came out the best. For the finale in Season 3, there are 3 alternate conclusions to the show, listed by creator Tim O'Mara as being spooky, happy, or surprising, with the spooky one being selected after a fan vote. So why was this show a flash in the pan despite rating well and getting 3 seasons? How come none of the actors did anything notable after, and why is there no coverage of the show as part of any pop culture discourse? Well, for obvious reasons, sharing your name with one of the biggest quiz shows of all time doesn't help your standing as memorable, especially because searching for Jeopardy returns only results regarding the quiz show. Considering the internet is the driving force behind all relevance in modern programming, being virtually unfindable on the internet doesn't bode well. Secondly, America drives the current nostalgia trends, and many shows that weren't shown in the States are traditionally forgotten. A melding of Scottish and Australian markets isn't really one that would typically stand the test of time. Despite this, the show was rerun in the UK in 2008 and received consistent reruns on the much-loved ABC3 in Australia throughout the late 2000s, even into early 2011. Which makes it even more mysterious as to why none of the actors ever did anything beyond the show. And there are so many questions about the production. It was filmed in conjunction between Australia and Scotland, so did the cast fly out to Australia for each new season on a kids show budget, or did they shoot it at once with 3 seasons in mind? The writing certainly indicates each new season was created as it went. And how big was the crew? It's difficult to convey the way this show was consumed, particularly in Australia. Every week, kids waiting for the bell to go so they could run home and watch the new episode. Kids role-playing the Jeopardy characters the next day at school. This stuff was captivating. For one thing, there were actual stakes in this show. Characters were in danger, disappearing and not returning, getting injuries, fighting. The majority of other kids shows over time have no stakes. They bookend each episode without conflict, the ending of the episode tying the entire contents of that episode up neatly as a self-contained concept. In Jeopardy, there were events that had consequences 5 episodes later, 10 episodes later. Things were at stake. You could get invested. So many questions about what happened to this show will be unanswered for a long time, as the entire thing was just a flash in the pan. But if you remember Jeopardy, you remember it fondly. And hopefully, sometime soon, it'll get the recognition it deserves.